So I was preparing my Easter message, and I came across a gentleman who had a very interesting story. So I'd asked him to come share that with us today. I think hearing his story will give us some insight. So I've got him waiting in the other room. I'm going to go grab him and send him in. Good morning and greetings to you all. I thank you for your time and thank you to your leaders for allowing me to come share. I had some things that have been weighing on my mind as of late as I've been reflecting, and I wanted to kind of just have a place where I can share my thoughts with some others. See, my name is Arsonius. I've been a loyal soldier of Rome for the most of my life. Like many young men, I served Rome, seeing its glory as I grew up, in search of fame and fortune, knowing that they paid a fair wage, and for a humble servant of Rome, money was not easy to come by. And none of that, I knew if I could survive 25 years of battle, I would have a piece of land to call my own. And so serve I did. I have proudly put in my time as a member of Rome, doing whatever was asked from me. As a young soldier, I was taught you follow orders, whether they come from your centurion, whether they come from your local governor, or for the emperor himself. Whatever you're told you're to do, because to disobey an order meant to disobey Rome, and disobey Rome meant to die. So over 25 years, I have done just that. I've served in countless battles. I have arrested crooks and thieves and robbers and murderers. I've killed countless men, all in the name of serving my emperor. I was taught early on that this job would not be easy. To serve Rome and to follow those orders meant you would have to kind of shut your emotions down, because if you got emotionally involved, if you got emotionally invested in everything, it was likely you were to disobey Rome, which meant to disobey an order would kill you. And I certainly wasn't prepared to die. So I left those decisions in the hands of my leaders, of my centurions that I served over the years, in the hands of the governors that I was attached to. Whatever politician made those calls, they had the judgment calls. I just simply followed orders. And in a time of servitude to Rome, now, retired, having my land, I reflect back. A lifetime in the military has caused me to do a lot of things that I just either simply don't remember or don't care to remember. But if any of you have served in your local military, you understand there are moments as a soldier that you don't forget. The first time you wield a blade and feel the cold steel in your hands. The first time you rush into battle and your nerves being on edge, wondering if you would kill or be killed. The story I want to share with you, the one that is ingrained in my mind, is the first time I had to execute a man. See, my travels as a legionnaire had taken me in 25 years all over, from Greece to Spain to Britain to even Judea. And that's where I served in the early part of my career. I was attached to a century of 80 men, one of many that served the Governor Pilate. The life of a soldier was pretty routine. You would march with your gear on day after day after day, logging in miles, developing a toughness and a hardness for battle. And when you weren't marching, you were training. So this stands out, not only for the execution, but even for the frenzy of events. Whenever we got a break from the monotony, we would get excited. And I remember this one particular day in general, as we were in Judea. I knew things in the land were going kind of heavy, kind of intense, because the Jewish people had this festival they were preparing for. Something tied to the Herod, something they called Passover. It was, for them, a big deal. It went back deep into their history and their lineage. For me, as a soldier, it was just another day. I wasn't really that invested in their customs, their cultures. I was just invested in doing my job. But nevertheless, that frenzy came to a head when I remember training with another soldier. We were preparing our hand-to-hand skills, exchanging blows with our blades, when we saw the crowd approach the palace. I remember this crowd surrounding one man that was being led. He was in chains, and he had on a tunic, beard, long hair, and he had a somberness about him that stood out. See, because at this point, granted, I have been involved with some arrests. I had dealt with criminal affairs. Even though I have not been part of an execution, I had been in just long enough to begin to formulate what a criminal would probably do, what he would probably react. And most of the times, once they were being arrested, even in compliance, you could see this look of defiance in their face. This look of rage that they had been captured. That of this look of guilt that they knew their end was coming. But he just had this look of somberness as they brought him to us. They had a small bit of Roman guards with them. I didn't know who they were. But I also saw they had some other soldiers that I recognized as the police of some of the local chief priests. And they brought him and said he was to go to Pilate on charges. So we escorted him to the front of the palace. And I remember waiting outside as he went inside to Pilate to be questioned. While we were waiting, I had found out from one of the local Roman soldiers that they had captured this man at a garden. He was some kind of local teacher, they said. And there seemed to be some different reports as to what he'd done. Some said he was a teacher, he was a healer. He brought this good news that he was supposed to be some kind of prince or something, some kind of king. And that is what bothered some of the others. As they said he was a blasphemer, that he was a liar and a cheater, claiming to be the king of the Jews, this son of the God of the Jews. Growing up with Roman gods such as Zeus and Athena and Hades, I was never really much of a religious man, so this idea of him being a son of God interests me even less. But I know that he said, the one Roman soldier said that they had captured him. They took him to the priest to be interrogated and then brought him here on charges. So as Pilate was questioning him, I don't know the conversation that took place, but I do know the orders that followed. They brought him back out to us to take him to the proper square and started hurting on him. All too excited to get some action, to brush up on my skills as a young, hungry soldier. I went with these men. We took our turns and we beat him. And we beat him good. We punched him. We kicked him. We watched him turn black and blue as he bled. We took the whip and took turns, making lashes across his back. For us, it was a break from the monotony. It was fun. I had no care who this man was. I didn't care if he was who he claimed. All I know is what my orders were. My orders at this time were to dish out a beating. I remember some of the men really got kind of carried away. And one made a crown of thorns and placed it on his head. Another took a blue shawl and placed it over him. And they mocked and said, "All hail, King of the Jews." It was funny. It was humorous. Because how could this man possibly be a king? What kind of man takes a beating like that and does nothing? Because he stayed silent the whole time. Now don't get me wrong, if he had a little stone, he might have made a really good soldier. Because I have not seen many men be able to take a beating like that without crying out in pain, without crying out in anguish. But by and large, he didn't cry out. As they said, "All hail King of the Jews," one of the men decided to continue the joke and bow, and most of us bowed before him. None of us cared if the claims are true or not. Once we did that, once we put a thorough beating, we handed him back over to Pilate. Our orders were done. We had done our job. He was in Pilate's hands, and Pilate had to decide what to do with him. Again, I learned very quickly as a soldier, you let the moral decisions go to the politicians and to the centurions. Pilate was there with them, and he came out into the balcony to address the crowd, which was at a fever pitch right now. It's as if whatever madness was in them had continued to grow as they yelled and they hissed and they cried out in anger. And he approached them. Pilate wanted to use one of the local legal loopholes that he could use to help this man out of it, because I saw the other man that he brought up to the platform as well. That man was Barabbas. Now that man deserved death. I knew who he was, and I knew what he had done. Killing, stealing, cheating others. He represented some of the vilest offenders that I had come across in my short time. I knew that he deserved death. But again, it wasn't my decision. As much as I knew it, to be honest, there's part of me that didn't care. It wasn't my decision to make. I just simply followed orders. And as I followed orders, Pilate addressed the crowd and asked which one did they want released. See, it was customary during this festival to release a prisoner. And I guess Pilate was looking for a way to release Jesus, because he really stacked the decks in this man's favor. But yet for some reason, this crowd chose Barabbas. Now, again, it wasn't my decision, but even I knew it was a no-brainer. Barabbas deserved death. There was nothing that I knew of to substantiate the claims of this man named Jesus. But if I had to pick between the two, I knew Barabbas was the one who should have been executed. Yet he was released. And when Pilate asked what they wanted him to do with this man Jesus that was still in custody, you could hear it billed as a whisper. And as our rage grew, it grew louder. Crucify him. Crucify him. Crucify him. Crucify him. Pilate, being the smart politician he was, knew he had a dilemma. See, as a governor, he had to make the moral decisions of what was right and wrong in the eyes of the law. And he brought out some water, washed his hands, and said, "His blood is on your hands." Much like most of Rome, we were just simply there to enforce the peace. So, when the orders came to execute him, again, I was a young, hungry soldier at that time. I wanted to experience an execution. I wanted to learn as a soldier. I knew maybe if I had done well enough, somewhere down the line, I might be a centurion. I was young enough to be naive, to do whatever it takes. And I got myself on that execution party. We got this man named Jesus to two other robbers. They said we're going to do all three executions at one time. And we got them fitted with their crosses. But Jesus, due to the beating we put on him before, was just too weak. I mean, the man was a beaten, battered, bloody mess. So one of the other soldiers said, "Well, let's just find someone in the crowd." And he pointed to me and said, "Go grab someone to carry this cross." To which I just simply grabbed the first man I could find and said, "We need you to carry the criminal Jesus' cross." He put up an argument, but I reminded him the same thing I was taught as a soldier. To disobey order meant to disobey Rome, and to disobey Rome was death. It was all it took to convince them. And I remember as the crosses were carried to this hill, we prepared them and we laid this man Jesus out for the execution. I was told I would hold the nails while another man pounded them in. And I could be wrong, it's been several years, but that's the moment I remember hearing him cry out in pain and agony. The moment that first nail broke his skin. He cried out in pain and anguish as we continued to drive the 3 nails in his hands. The other prisoners were nailed as well, and those crosses were raised. And thus began one of the longest moments of my life at that point. See, crucifixions are a long, drawn-out execution. They were revered for the most vilest of offenders. It was designed in a way where it would take hours as the nails held them there. They couldn't keep their bodies in a way to keep them breathing. So one of 2 things would happen. They would either pass out from the pain of keeping themselves up, or they would die from suffocation because of not having the energy to do so. But I remember as I stood there, it just seemed different. Granted, I hadn't experienced an execution, but this man, Jesus, just seemed so different. See, most criminals, as I said earlier, they act out. They act out. And one of 2 things happens upon the verge of their execution. They're either filled with anger and bitterness over the circumstances that got them there and the death that they had acquired, or guilt and remorse that they didn't make different decisions. And I saw that in the other 2 men. Because one even believed that this man Jesus was who he said he was and asked for forgiveness. His grief overpowering him on his deathbed. And the other one responded in anger and ridiculed him for it. Yet this man Jesus, who had remained by and large silent, said to the other man, "I forgive you, and today you'll live with me in paradise." I asked one of the other soldiers if this response of compassion, this response of love I was seeing from this man on the cross that went to these other prisoners, that he poured out to the people who were there crying over him, such as his mother, was normal. And they said no. It seems strange. But again, I was a soldier, and I followed orders. But the moment I knew something was different was after several hours just waiting for these men to die. This man, Jesus, lifted his head and said, "This finished." And as he did so, the clouds came over. The sky got as dark as it can be, and it raged with the fury of the gods. The ground shook as if a heavenly being grabbed the entire planet and shook it. I hadn't experienced anything like this in my career, and I looked to some of the other men I served with to see what their responses were, to see if this was normal or if they had any indication of what was going on. And they had the same look of awe over what we were experiencing as well. The only person who had the wherewithal in our unit to say anything was our centurion, who declared that this man truly was the Son of God. And in that moment, the rest of it was pretty much a blur. I know some of the local priests who were involved with his arrest wanted us to hurry these executions. They had some religious day the next day, and they wanted him to be buried before that. So we went to the criminals. One soldier took a hammer, broke the legs of the 2 others, but when we went to Jesus, we could tell he truly was dead, that it was over. So as procedure dictated, I grabbed his spear and punctured his side and watched as the blood and water flowed, and we removed his body off that cross. That would be the last I would see of that man Jesus, as we handed him over to one of the locals to be buried. I hadn't for a long time really followed what had happened to him. We'd heard reports a few days later that some of the local guards messed up and allowed the body to be taken. We laughed a good bit of it at their blunder, knowing that they wouldn't make good soldiers of Rome. But as I continued to serve for a long time, as it moved around, I didn't hear much of this man Jesus. I never really knew what happened to his work, to his life after that point. Until sometime later, I came across a man who, when he told me when he found out I was involved with Christ's execution, that he told me what I was doing was part of a bigger plan. That man Jesus truly was the Son of God, and that death served as redemption. See, he paid the ultimate price. The Jewish customs and cultures to that point required a continuous process of sacrifices to forgive their sins. And that man's Jesus, that death that day, was part of playing into this ultimate sacrifice, this plan that God that he served, that God that he was the Son of, had in mind to bestow this grace and forgiveness, not just for the Jews, but for all. And toward the tail end of my career, I continued, as I had certain leeways with my seniority, went where I could to do research on this man Jesus and his teachings. And now, as I am no longer a servant of Rome, I have done my time and retired. That is why I asked to come here today, to declare my misdoings as part of his death. In my youth, all I wanted was to serve Rome. In my old age, I make no regrets about the decisions I have, but I do seek forgiveness for them. And so I'm here today to ask the God of the Jews, the God of all, for that forgiveness, for my part in the death of his Son, and for the many other wrongdoings that we're doing in this life, and to experience that grace and forgiveness. I thank you for your time in allowing me to share my story. And I ask if you would allow me, before I leave, to do what's been in my heart and to pray for that forgiveness. God,